Everybody ready? Good afternoon, everybody. We're here to talk about an incident that occurred on Sunday, August 18, 2019, at the Southern Comfort Mobile Home Park on US 19 in Clearwater. Let me just identify a couple of the people who are, I'd say, the key players in this, involved in it for you. The first, and they both have the same first name. The first is Baudilio, B-A-U-D-I-L-L-O, Mendez-Vasquez. He's 25 years old. His date of birth is December 5th, 1993. And he lives at the Capri Mobile Home Park, 24479 US 19 North in Clearwater, lot 825. The second person who is the deceased in this case is same first name, Baudilio, B-A-U-D-I-L-O, Morales-Velasquez. He's 31 years old, and his date of birth, June 21st, 1988. He lived at the Southern Comfort Mobile Home Park, 24195 US 19 North in Clearwater, lot number 121. So as I said, this incident happened on Sunday, August 18th, when deputies received a call about an altercation that was occurring at the Capri Mobile Home Park on US 19 in Clearwater. It had involved an injury, and the caller was Mendez-Vasquez. So he had called 911 and reported that someone had kicked him and had fled the scene. Mendez-Vasquez reported the suspect who assaulted him was a Hispanic male, medium build, about 35 years old, who was riding a bicycle. As the dispatcher was putting the call out over the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office radio system, along with that description, Deputy Edward Feidt, F-E-I-D-T, was northbound on US 19 along the access road just north of Sunset Point Road and just south of the Capri Mobile Home Park. Deputy Feidt saw a Hispanic male, medium build, about 35 years old, riding a bicycle southbound on the access road from the Capri Mobile Home Park. Deputy Feidt announced over the radio that he observed a subject fitting the suspect description that had been put out over the radio, and that someone needed to stop the person, and that he was going to continue to the scene at the Capri Mobile Home Park. Deputy Jeff Clement, who's a K-9 deputy, was right behind Deputy Feidt. He also saw that same person, matching the description that had been received from Mendez-Vasquez when he called 911 as to the person who had committed the assault. Deputy Clement also decided that he was going to go to the scene. He's a K-9 deputy, and that he was best needed at the scene. Sergeant Noble Katzer was behind them, and he was also northbound on the access road of US 19 just north of Sunset Point Road, and he saw that same subject matching the description of the suspect, and he stopped the person just inside the Southern Comfort Mobile Home Park, which is, again, just south of Capri, where Mendez-Vasquez had called from. So Sergeant Katzer stopped the subject, who was later identified as Baudilio Morales-Velasquez. As we were talking about here, and as we said, Mendez-Vasquez and Morales-Velasquez are both from Guatemala, and they share the same first name, and of course, as you can hear, they have similar last names. So for ease of identification and to avoid confusion as we go through this, I'm going to refer to Morales-Velasquez as the deceased, and Mendez-Vasquez, the 911 caller, by his last name. So make sure we're all clear with this. As it turns out, neither the deceased nor Mendez-Vasquez knew each other at all. They didn't know each other. They lived both in Guatemala, both share same first name, similar last names. They're living at adjacent, if you will, mobile home parks, but they didn't know each other. The deceased was in the country illegally, and he was working at Chopsticks Restaurant in Clearwater. Mendez-Vasquez is also here illegally, and he was working for a roofing company in Clearwater. Sergeant Katzer stopped the deceased because he matched the description of the suspect who Mendez-Vasquez claimed assaulted him just north of where he was seen by the deputies. When Sergeant Katzer asked the deceased for identification, he produced a photograph on his cellular phone of an identification card from Guatemala. So he didn't have any physical ID. He had a photograph on his phone of a Guatemalan ID in his name, and that's what he gave to Sergeant Katzer. So as you can see here, and just stop for a second, is that this is an aerial photo of the Southern Comfort Mobile Home Park. And without stepping over there, because I'm here at the microphone and so people can hear, is that first yellow car you see down here at the bottom, that is where Sergeant Katzer stopped the deceased. So as they turned into the mobile home park, he stopped him just inside the mobile home park, which again is just off of US 19 and the access road just north of Sunset Point Road. So by the time that Sergeant Katzer stopped the deceased, Deputy Fight was further to the north, and he had made contact with Mendez-Vasquez at the Capri Mobile Home Park. Provide a little background and backdrop is the night before is that deputies, including Deputy Fight and Sergeant Katzer, had responded to the Capri Mobile Home Park for a big melee, a big fight that had occurred there. And so as they were responding now back out the next night, they thought that it was related to the incident that happened the night before, where there had been this big melee and a whole bunch of people fighting and there was blood and a big disturbance that had happened the night before. So when Deputy Fight arrived, he approached the Mendez-Vasquez residence, which is a mobile home. He saw blood on the ground and there was also blood on the wall. He didn't initially see Mendez-Vasquez, but he eventually exited the mobile home and he had a cut on his right hand. Mendez-Vasquez was clearly intoxicated. He was uncooperative. There was also a language barrier because Mendez-Vasquez didn't speak English and Sergeant Katzer doesn't speak Spanish. Deputy Fight got on the radio and asked Sergeant Katzer if the person he had stopped was injured, and Sergeant Katzer replied that he was not. So again, they were in separate mobile home parks. Katzer had stopped the deceased, and Deputy Fight was with Mendez-Vasquez. Deputy Fight told Sergeant Katzer over the radio that there was blood at the scene, and it appeared there had been some type of a struggle and some type of an altercation. So the person who that Sergeant Katzer had stopped is that Hispanic male, medium build, riding a bike, about 35 years old, and now he's being told there's blood at the scene and that there had been appearances of an altercation. So he believes that he has the person stopped who is involved and may be a suspect in this altercation that Deputy Fight is investigating. When Sergeant Katzer received the information from Deputy Fight, he was in his cruiser and he was typing information into the computer to try and verify the identification of the deceased on that photograph from the Guatemalan ID card. So as he's sitting in the car and he's on the computer, he gets this information from Deputy Fight about the blood at the scene, the altercation, the appearance, et cetera. And about 30 seconds after he gets that is the deceased takes off running. And he had been standing in front of Sergeant Katzer's cruiser by his bicycle when, just for no reason, he just fled. And he fled, as you can see here, he fled to the north and to the east. So, I'm gonna step away here. So when he runs that way. So he runs north and he runs east through the mobile homes and to the road that runs to the east, and then comes up here. When the deceased ran, Sergeant Katzer in his car proceeded east on the road that he's on there and then took that north turn. You can see where the yellow cruiser is depicted on there, and he goes to the north. As Sergeant Katzer goes to the north is when the deceased running to the east turns south. So they literally pass each other. So the deceased is running to the south, Sergeant Katzer is driving his cruiser to the north, and when the deceased passes Sergeant Katzer because he's running to the south, and he's heading over to the mobile home with a red circle around it over there, that's when Sergeant Katzer exited his cruiser and he began chasing the deceased on foot. He was yelling for him to stop, yelling for him to get on the ground, but the deceased disregarded the commands and continued running east and around the trailer at number 121, which is the trailer that's depicted there, the mobile home depicted there with a red circle. Sergeant Katzer tried along the east side of the mobile home. He tried to tase the deceased, but the probes missed. So when we're talking about the use of the taser, there's two ways the taser can be used. One is when the probes, electronic probes, are deployed and it causes the person to stop when it affects that electromuscular disconfiguration, as it's called, and the person generally will fall to the ground. But the probes have to strike, and you have to generally have both probes. The probes totally missed. The other way that the taser can be used, and we'll talk about this because it's relevant, is in what's called drive stun mode. It's when the cartridge is removed and it's used as a pain compliance technique and it's pressed against the skin. So at this time, is because the person was fleeing, and with what Sergeant Katzer knew is he was trying to stop him, and he was trying to stop him with the deployment of the taser, but again, the probes moved, or the probes missed, and the deceased kept running. As Sergeant Katzer rounded around the corner of lot number 121, he saw the deceased on the front stoop of the mobile home, and he was jerking the door, and he was trying to open it. The deceased was also banging on the door. The top step of the stoop is about 18 inches off the ground. So the second photograph over there is the mobile home. That is the door. That is the stoop. And the top step of that stoop, which again, when you measure, it's about 18 inches off the ground, is where the deceased was standing. And he was banging on the door. He was yelling. He's jerking it. And he was trying to get in. Sergeant Katzer thought that he was trying to break in to the mobile home and to get away from him. He again ordered the deceased to get on the ground, and the deceased refused. Sergeant Katzer at this point deployed his taser a second time because the deceased wasn't following his commands, and he thought he was trying to break into the mobile home, and he was concerned for residents inside. Sergeant Katzer didn't know whether the deceased was armed, but believed the person who fled from him was involved in some type of a confrontation where there was blood on the ground and that someone was injured. When Sergeant Katzer deployed the taser, the deceased fell to the ground and struck his head. When a backup deputy arrived, the deceased was laying face down, and they could not see his hands as they were under him. The deputies tried to handcuff the deceased, but he appeared to be resisting, and he was bracing and tensing. He failed to follow directions, and his hands were still concealed underneath him. Now, this happens way too often. I'd say it happens regularly as we're trying to take somebody into custody where people are being uncooperative, and they'll put their arms under them, and it's very difficult to break those hands free, to pull them out, and to get them handcuffed. Because of that situation, Sergeant Katzer again deployed the taser, and this time is that it was deployed in what I just described to you as drive stun mode, which is using the tip of the taser, and when you pull the trigger on it, is that it causes a pain compliance, and you're trying to get the person to do what you're trying to get them to do and what you're asking them to do. And it's not like the cycle with the probes, where the probes are deployed, it's a 5-second cycle before it stops. Is as soon as you get compliance, is that you can release the trigger and the device will deactivate and you're no longer inflicting pain. So you're just trying to get the person, in this case, to get their hands out from underneath them so you can see him, because they didn't know whether he had a gun under there or why he wasn't compliant. But eventually, they were able to get his hands out from underneath him and to get him handcuffed. After that, the deputies realized that the deceased was injured. They called EMS, and it was later determined, and they didn't know this at the time, it was later determined that the deceased actually lived at that lot. He actually lived at 121, so where he was trying to get into is that he actually lived there. He was transported to Bayfront, where he was diagnosed with a brain injury from the fall. He remained in the hospital until August 30th, when he passed away. The medical examiner conducted an autopsy, determined the manner of death to be homicide and the cause of death to be complications of blunt force trauma, with a contributing cause to be the deployment of the electronic control device. Because the deceased was injured and subsequently died as a result of law enforcement action, the matter was investigated independently by the state attorney's office. The state attorney's office issued a 23-page determination on Monday, October 29th, October 28th, that the death was excusable homicide. The state attorney's office determined that Sergeant Katzer's actions, including the discharge of the taser, were lawful, and that the deceased's death was by accident and misfortune, and therefore excusable homicide under Florida Statute 782.03. Through the investigation, we determined that Mendez-Vasquez, the original caller, that his call to 911 reporting the initial fight and assault was a lie, and that he made a false 911 call. We determined that Mendez-Vasquez had been drinking heavily that night. He had cut himself on a bottle. He bled outside on the ground, and when his brother saw the blood, his brother became upset because he was concerned that a law enforcement officer driving by would see it, it would draw attention to them, and somehow that it was related to that previous night's incident where the cops were around and they didn't want the attention. In response to his brother's concerns, Mendez-Vasquez became angry. He told his brother that, quote, that he would call the cops himself. He then grabbed a cell phone, called 911, made up the description of the person who allegedly assaulted him, which unfortunately happened to match the description of the deceased, and including the fact that he was riding a bike, and the deceased happened to be in the area at that time. We arrested Mendez-Vasquez this morning on a warrant charging him with felony misuse of the 911 system, and he was booked into the Pinellas County Jail on a $50,000 bond. So that's the situation. That's what happened, and happy to answer any questions that you have.
Sheriff, do you think their legal status in this country impacted the events that followed?
Probably. I think two things, and again, I don't know this for sure, so I'm answering your question is, do I think? And yes, I do. I think that first is that probably one of the reasons why Mendez-Vasquez's brother and others there didn't want to have the cops around and draw attention is probably because Mendez-Vasquez and all those people are here illegally. So that was probably contributing to it, and why he initially said it was concerned about the blood, et cetera. So that probably contributed to their concern initially. And probably with the deceased is probably the reason why he ran was he was concerned that Sergeant Katzer was on the computer and was going to determine that he was here illegally. And unfortunately, sadly, doesn't know the difference between local law enforcement and ICE because when you look back on it now, is that he had no reason to run other than that we know of. This guy was working 7 days a week, 10, 12 hours a day at Chopsticks. He lived at that mobile home with his 14-year-old son, was not involved in any criminal activity, wasn't doing anything wrong, sadly. But he matched the description from Mendez-Vasquez, was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The circumstances lined up just horrifically, and we ended up with a very tragic situation because of it. But yeah, I do. I think that there's two times in this where that was a contributing factor. One is they don't want the cops around because they're concerned about illegal immigration status, and it looks like the deceased probably ran because he thought that Sergeant Katzer had some ability or authority to enforce immigration law. And as many times as I said it, as many times as we talked about it, and we reiterate this, is that we're not the immigration police. We have no authority to enforce immigration law. We don't enforce immigration law. We're not ICE, and we try and get that word out to the community so they understand that they should not be concerned about local law enforcement when it comes to immigration status.
Should the caller make any indication that his description of his alleged assailant was this gentleman? Had he seen him go by on a bike? I mean, did he just randomly pick somebody that happened to match?
It happened to match, and now we don't know for sure. Mendez-Vasquez was standing in front of his trailer. The deceased did know some people in the Capri Mobile Home Park. Was he in the Capri Mobile Home Park as he was coming home from work and Mendez-Vasquez saw him and he matched it up and used him? We don't know that. But what we do know is that he gave us a description of a Hispanic male, about 35 years old, riding a bike, medium build, and it fit the description of the deceased, unfortunately. Whether it was purely coincidence or whether the deceased has been in the mobile home park and he used that as his reference point to create the false narrative and the false statement, I can't answer that for sure. I don't know.
So what will happen? Let me just follow up on what I asked.
Yeah.
What will happen now with all of the people in this mobile home park who are here illegally? Will ICE ICE now become involved?
I don't know, you gotta ask ICE that. I have no idea. You know, we do not engage at all in street level immigration enforcement. We don't go out with ICE when they are doing their enforcement actions. That's totally an ICE question. We don't get involved in it. We're not the immigration police. We have no authority. I've said this so many times, but unfortunately is the message gets lost and twisted and misreported, misunderstood, is that local law enforcement in this country has no authority to enforce immigration law.
But will you report what you have found to ICE?
We don't report anything to ICE. Is that what we will report is we do now that Mendez-Vasquez has been arrested and he's been booked into the Pinellas County Jail, and now he is a criminal illegal. He's committed a crime. Through those normal reporting processes, they will become aware that he has committed a crime. He's been booked into the jail. They'll make a determination whether they want to issue a detainer for him and take custody of him if and when he posts bond or is released. As far as the people within the Southern Comfort Mobile Home Park or the Capri Mobile Home Park is that it's common knowledge. Seriously, first of all, Southern Comfort Mobile Home Park is being closed today. Today is the day everybody's being evicted out of there because of the conditions. So the landlord's closing that park. Capri is right there. That is remaining open. But both of those mobile home parks and many other residential areas in that area of Clearwater is that they're full of illegal aliens. I mean, it's common knowledge. Everybody knows it. But to answer your question is that we don't report that stuff to ICE. It's not our job. And we don't get involved in that. That's purely for ICE to make its own decisions, make its own determinations. But you could ask anybody is that both of those mobile home parks are full of people that are here illegally.
Do you think that
And a lot of those people have been here for 15 and 20 years.
do you think that the barrier language could have make it worse the situation? Because he couldn't tell the officer that he lived there, and Mendez-Vasquez, he doesn't speak a lot of his English either.
No, I mean, you know, certainly I'll say it this way is that when you have a language barrier, it certainly doesn't make it easier. You know, you got to be able to effectively communicate with people, and the language barrier does make it hard. It makes it harder. Would it have changed this? I can't tell you. I don't know. You know, it's unfortunate that the deceased decided to run. If he hadn't, and because at that point, it was impossible for Sergeant Katzer to know anything other than, like I told you, is that he had been told by the deputy at the scene that there was the appearance of an altercation, a fight, there's blood, a person claiming to be injured, a Hispanic male, 35, riding a bike, medium build, matching the description. He stops him within a couple tenths of a mile of where it occurred, and he gets an ID that's on a cell phone and is a photograph of an ID, and nothing puts the deceased as a resident of the Southern Comfort Mobile Home Park. So when he takes off running and he runs the lot 121, Sergeant Katzer had no idea, and it was impossible for him to know that the guy actually lived in lot 121, where if they had been able to communicate, would something have come out about that? I don't know. You know, that's all hypothetical, and I can't answer that. But again, I'll say that certainly when we have a hard time communicating with people because of a language barrier, it doesn't make it any easier. No doubt about that.
So are they shutting it down today because of, in part, this action?
No, it's not. My understanding is that they've got a lot of infrastructure problems in that mobile home park. People haven't had water. They haven't had plumbing. They've had all kinds of issues in there. And they're shutting it down because of those infrastructure problems within the mobile home park, is my understanding.
Would that have happened without this?
I don't know. You have to ask them. I have no idea about that. I think so. I don't think this has any bearing on it, is my understanding. Yeah.
Couple of questions, Sheriff. Given that it's common knowledge that the residents there are typically illegal immigrants from Spanish-speaking countries, is there an effort to deploy more deputies there who do speak Spanish to overcome the language barrier?
We do, you know, and I challenge you to find any law enforcement agency, certainly in the county. I'll challenge you to find anyone in the state or elsewhere that has undertaken the efforts that we have to train our personnel within the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office to be fluent Spanish speakers. We have a full-time employee in our training section that full-time teaches people Spanish. We run continuous, and we're not talking about Spanish immersion classes. We're talking about programs that last a year or two to train the deputies, train the dispatchers, train the deputies in the jail. We have a robust program, and we've done this now for about the last probably 8 years, And we run it throughout the year, and we have continual training, and it's a continual process to teach the deputies and teach our personnel the Spanish language because of the challenge we have and because of that language barrier. There's nobody that's doing more than we're doing to try and address that issue and to try and remedy it the best we can and have as many Spanish speakers out there as we can so that we can effectively communicate with people.
Is there any, like, inclination to make that mandatory?
Well, no. I mean, look at what it is to try and learn a foreign language. You can't force somebody to do it and shouldn't try and force someone to do it. We get a fair number of people that participated in it. In fact, a lot of people participated in it. We do have people, of course, deputies who speak Spanish as a second language because they're legacy speakers or whatever the case may be. But we also have a number that have learned it on their own. And we also, in addition to the big Spanish program that we have, Spanish language program, and teaching it, which is the first phase of it's a year-long program. Then there's a second phase, et cetera, and there's a lot of maintenance that goes with it. And there's also an opportunity to attend Spanish immersion classes so that they have, certain key words and phrases that they can use. So we make a big effort to break down that language barrier.
Sheriff, how many times did the sergeant drive stun the deceased?
3.
3 times. After he's fallen to the ground and hit his head.
So he falls to the ground, and when he falls to the ground, he's laying there, and because he can't see his hands and he doesn't know whether he has a weapon or not, and when he's laying there, he's waiting for a backup deputy, and the probes are still in him, which is the common practice because you don't want to approach. You use a system of cover and contact, so somebody's covering where the other's making contact. So you're waiting for the backup deputy to get there. When the backup deputy gets there, they roll him over. He's got his hands under them, and he's bracing, tensing, and he's not taking his hands out. Again, what they believed what they had was a guy who was committing a forcible felony, breaking into a residence, had been involved in this altercation, everything, and they didn't know, that I told you, they didn't know whether he had a weapon, and as they're trying to pull his hands, he's pulling back, and they're pulling his hands, he's pulling back. So a drive stun under those circumstances is completely appropriate as a pain compliance technique to try and get him to release his hands so they can handcuff him.
The state attorney says that it's an excusable homicide when an innocent man is dead due to a lie and due to miscommunication. Do you have a problem with what happened here at all with the sergeant's actions at all?
I have no problem with what the sergeant did. He acted completely consistent with what he should have done under those circumstances with what he knew at the time. There's no way that he could have known anything differently. And with what he knew, again, is that you got a scene, an altercation, an assault, you got blood, you've got a melee that happened the night before, you've got the description of the person who fled the scene of this assault they're investigating, that this guy matches to a T, including Hispanic male, 35, medium build, on a bike, who's right there, and you stop him, and as you're doing your due diligence and doing your investigation, just a few minutes into it, the guy takes off running. You yell to him, stop, get on the ground, stop, get on the ground. He turns around and looks at you, and he keeps running, and you end up in this foot chase, and you're trying to get him into custody. You tase him, you miss, you're around a corner, and he's banging on a door, yanking on the door, pulling on the door, trying to get in. You think he's trying to break into somebody's house and somebody's in jeopardy inside. What else are you supposed to do? So he tases him again. And when he tases him again, unfortunately, he fell and hit his head.
He got tasered 3 more times.
Yeah, but he got tasered 3 more times because of the bracing and tensing and not being able to get him handcuffed and not being able to show his hands. So at that point, he had already fell and hit his head, but he's bracing and tensing, and you don't know whether he's got a gun or a weapon or what he's got under there. So it's completely appropriate.
This is the 3rd taser death in the past 7 years, at least, the Pinellas Sheriff's deputies have been involved in. Is it too convenient of a tool? Is it being overused?
No, and this has nothing to do with the taser, is that you don't mistake that, is that in taser deaths where the taser is allegedly the cause, the taser is not the cause of this. It has nothing to do with the electrical nature of the device. Unfortunately here is that this guy fell off an 18-inch step and hit his head. It has nothing to do with the taser itself. Is that if the deputy was using an asp, using a nightstick, or using something else, or grabbed him and he fell to the ground, forget about the taser. Unfortunately, the guy hit his head. It has nothing to do with the taser. The taser is the most effective tool that is going to cause the least harm in the absolute majority of the cases, is that it's ugly to go hands-on with somebody. It's ugly to get into a knockdown, drag-out fight. When you end up in ground fighting, or you ended up having to use an asp, or you're having to use some other type of a weapon, or what's worse, spraying somebody in the face with pepper spray. So the taser actually is the most effective, the best way to gain compliance where the pain that is being caused is most immediately relieved. Is that you don't get quick relief from pepper spray, is that if you're using an asp and you hurt somebody and you break a bone or you bruise them, that takes a long time to heal. The effects of a taser are gone as soon as they're applied. There is no lingering effect to the taser. So absolutely not.
I think the ME report indicated the taser was a contributing factor.
Yeah, but it could, insert in that, okay, when it says contributing cause, insert asp, nightstick, hands, fist. They're not talking about the taser being a contributing cause because of the electrical nature of the taser. They're talking about the taser being a contributing cause because it's the tasing that caused the fall. There's a big difference there, big difference.
Sheriff,
Yeah, go ahead.
with your use of force guidelines, when is the actual probe portion of the taser deployable? So he was running,
Right.
and would that have been a good tase at that point, just running, or was it that he tried to get into the house?
When somebody's running from you and they're engaged in what we would generally refer to as active resistance, is that, again, the answer is yes, as soon as the person actively resists. So you could have a circumstance, if you tell somebody you're under arrest, and the person says, yeah, not so much. Turn around, put your hands behind your back. Yeah, not so much, I'm not gonna do it. And you end up in that dialogue with the person, you got two choices at that point, or a few choices, but one of them is you can go hands-on. As I just said to Josh in response to his question, is that go through that. Going hands-on with somebody 100% of the time is gonna be ugly. 100% of the time is that it is going to be a situation where there's at least a significant chance somebody's gonna get hurt out of it. And you're gonna end up having to punch, to hit, to strike, and it is not a good situation to be in as you're wrestling around on the ground. Or you could say, look, I'm gonna tell you one more time, and if you don't do it, I'm gonna tase you. And then if you end up having to tase them, it's over with like that, and you got them in custody. Just like when people are in the back of cruisers and they're trying to kick the window out. What are you gonna do, climb in the back seat and get in this knockdown, drag out tussle? Or you tell them, do it again, I'm going to drive stun you, or I'm gonna tase you and get you to stop it. So the taser is a very effective tool that is, again, relieving the consequence of it as fast as you apply the consequences of it.
So just to return to my earlier question, to see that all the way through to the end, you know, obviously you guys are working on, you know, putting Spanish into the force, but are these mobile home parks too small? Is the district around it too big for you to ensure that the only deputies who serve those areas are Spanish speakers?
Yeah, we can't do that. I mean, that's impossible to do. There's no way. We don't have enough Spanish speakers to do that, and the Spanish-speaking Hispanic population's too big. And it is certainly growing throughout the county. It's growing significantly and has for the last number of years, especially in North Pinellas County, especially in the Clearwater area. So there's no way that we have enough people only to have Spanish-speaking deputies in those areas. It's impossible to do that.
And we had talked, you know, there was previous stories with the family in this case, and they were hoping for help repatriating his body. Is there any movement on that?
You know, that's nothing that we can do anything about. You know, we don't have the resources to do that, and that would be inappropriate for us to do that. We can't do that.
Sheriff, are you still against deputies using body cams?
Yeah, we're not using body cams. Yeah.
And Sheriff, you already kind of addressed this, but is there anything that could have been done differently here, or should have been done differently?
Sure. One is that don't commit a crime and a felony and false report a 911 call. And then secondly, you know, don't run from the cops. I mean, it's unfortunate. I get it. But, you know, the two things that put this in motion were Mendez-Vasquez lying and making a false report and giving a description of the cops that fit to a T the deceased in this case. And secondly, the other thing to put this in motion was the deceased running. And is Sergeant Katzer's chasing him and telling him, get on the ground, stop, get on the ground, and verbalizing commands, and he's turning around and look, he keeps going. So, you know, those are the two things that would have avoided this situation.
Anything law enforcement should have done differently?
No, not at all. Sergeant Katzer didn't do anything wrong. Is it, what are you supposed to do when somebody runs from you? What are you supposed to do, say bye? When somebody was, again, a suspect, where there's blood on the ground, somebody's claimed they've been injured, and they fit the description to a T. What are we supposed to do? Just let them go?
Sheriff, respectfully, you do that with car chases. You let them go.
Not all the time, we don't.
Well, unless it's, you know what I'm talking
No,
about.
but there's a different reason for that, Josh. You're mixing things up. There's a different reason for that. One is when we're chasing people in a car, and if we do let them go, is that if you got somebody that's got dark tinted windows, and they start taking off at 110 miles an hour, it's not worth somebody driving that weapon, which is that hunk of metal car driving 110 miles an hour, T-boning somebody in an intersection and killing a mother and a father and their kids in a car. That's a very different type of situation, and why we don't chase than a foot chase through a mobile home park, is that we do foot chases all the time. And we will chase if it's worth it to chase in a car. So you have to, the reason why we don't chase is because it's not worth and the danger that it causes to the public. That's why we don't chase. It's not because we don't want to get the bad guy, and not because they shouldn't run, but because there's a danger in engaging in a chase and a danger to public safety that is not outweighed by the facts and circumstances as to why we would engage. If we have somebody that commits an armed robbery, we're going to chase them all day long, because the armed robbery is worth the risk to the public safety in getting an armed robber into custody. Somebody's got a suspended driver's license because they're speeding, because they ran a stop sign, because they got a baggie of marijuana. That isn't worth your life, my life, or the public's life. But chasing somebody on foot through a mobile home park, yeah, we're going to chase them all day long. It's apples and oranges.
Sheriff, can you spell the two deputies' names who were out with the subjects in both mobile home parks?
So Fight is F-E-I-D-T, Edward Fight, and Noble, N-O-B-L-E, Katzer, K-A-T-Z-E-R. K-A-T-Z-E-R, Katzer, Noble,
Noble, N-O-B-L-E or Yo?
L-E, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Anything else? No? Okay, all right, thanks.